somebody so inclined to worship yoginis, or somebody so inclined to worship the yakshinis, or any of the form, any female form of deity can be worshipped in and around the Kamakhya temple. That is why it was so prized even before and even now. It's not easy. The other bhakti is not enough. If bhakti were enough, then the deity would appear in front of you at this very moment. If your bhakti was that pure, if your jnana was that pure, if your vairagya was that pure. Because it is not. There were more tantras specifically written for Kamakhya, not just written. I mean, there are tantras which have sections devoted to Kamakhya. It's at least close to 2,300, 2,500-year-old place. So, and there is no limit to what Kamakhya is. And whatever I can say is perhaps maybe 5%, 10% of what the deity really is, living deity. And I'm saying that process of worship in Kamakhya is entirely tantric. So there is offerings of ritualized alcohol, etc.
If a person in sadhana is deeply connected to the mother and worships her, would that automatically make him her Shakta Upasaka?
Yes, like, if you're worshipping Shakti, then then you are a Shakta Upasaka. But it is important to understand that you are a Shakta by your disposition. Whether you're an Upasaka or not, that we have to see. Shakta by disposition is somebody who is deeply connected to the divine feminine, the divine mother. Okay, whatever form of the mother. But connection to achhi baat hai, to first stage ho gaya. Even remember that even the greatest of siddhas had to pass through the system of upasana, because it is difficult. It is not easy. Just bhakti is not enough. If bhakti were enough, then the deity would appear in front of you at this very moment. If your bhakti was that pure, if your jnana was that pure, if your vairagya was that pure. Because it is not pure, that is why you are a human being. That is why you have to go step by step, working on yourself, as well as following the paths recommended by people who have actually walked the path and succeeded. That is why the upasana comes in. So you become a Shakta Upasana when you follow the Shakta systems. And you become a Shakta Tantric Upasana when you follow the Tantric systems of Upasana. So that is the technical difference, if you ask me.
So, follow-up question by the same person. Please say something about Maa Kamakhya. And I would just sort of add that if you could talk a little bit about the menstruating cycles of the Kamakhya Mandir. It was very intriguing. We had a talk by Sinu Joseph on Kamakhya Mandir, and she talked about it. That seemed so bizarre, and it's probably commonplace. But to deracinated people like myself, I guess it seems very bizarre. So if you could reflect a little bit upon that.
So Kamakhya is, in my personal opinion, perhaps the most powerful of all Shakti Peeths. Most powerful. There is no limit to what Kamakhya is. And whatever I can say is perhaps maybe 5%, 10% of what the deity really is, living deity. And I'm saying that one is that, from a distance you have some theoretical knowledge, ki aisa hai, this deity, etc. And another is to enter into the mandala of Kamakhya and actually see how she works. Then it's a fascinating thing. This is a temple with which I've been, I think perhaps first time I visited was in 2013. There's not been a year when I haven't visited Kamakhya, and sometimes multiple times in a year. So Kamakhya, first of all, is a very, very old temple, very old temple. I mean, forget the main structure, the Garbhagriha. I was reading somewhere, I think scientists from the Guwahati University and all had done some testing, and the stones in that near the Garbhagriha and all that. So it is at least close to 2,300, 2,500-year-old place. So at that specific spot, for such a long period of time, there was a conception that there is a huge amount of tremendous presence of a great deity, and Shakta deity. It's Shakti, there's no doubt about it, form of Shakti that is there. And let's call it Mahamaya, without going to differentiation. And then we find that by 9th century, the Kalika Puran that was composed was from around the Kamakhya temple. It considered Kamakhya as a deity who is both Kali as well as she is also Tripur Sundari. And this is the uniqueness of this deity. Now, after few more centuries, there were more tantras specifically written for Kamakhya, not just written. I mean, there are tantras which have sections devoted to Kamakhya. You will see that the deity of Kamakhya, if you see a typical image of the deity, you will find Maa Kamakhya's having 6 different faces, and there are 12 arms. Okay, and she sits on a lotus, and the lotus comes out of the navel of Shiva, and Shiva is lying on a lion. So this whole iconography of the deity was basically the 6 faces are 6 different deities who are inside one, which means basically Kamakhya can be worshipped as Tripur Sundari, can be worshipped as Chamunda, can be worshipped as Durga, etc., etc. 6, and each of them have their own complete system of worship and method of upasana. Now, the name Kamakhya became more popular because it is when the deity turns into her form as Kamakhya, which is one of the 6 forms, that is when she becomes a boon giver, which means anything that is asked of her in that state. Kamakhya is a particular state. When she acquires that state of Kamakhya, whatever you ask, you will be getting that. That is the first principle. But it is not that simple as it sounds, the way I'm putting it. So it requires a lot of upasana. And the central place of Kamakhya is basically not there is no vigraha inside. It is a cave, and inside the cave there is a water that flows out. It is inside that cave, inside that water that flows out. That is where the deity is. So that's why there are certain terms which are used in tantras. So she is referred to as the Avyakta Vigraham, which means that one is unmanifest. She is a deity who is unmanifest. Yes, there is a Utsavamurti of Kamakhya if you enter the main temple, but the main deity where it is there is basically it's not. There is no vigraha there. There's a cave and there is a water flowing, and that is where she is. And there is no. It is in the atmosphere inside that cave that she sits. Somebody who has the subtle vision may perhaps even see the deity, and those who don't, they go there, do namaskara. And interesting thing about Kamakhya is that you don't do normal in other places. You fold your hands and do namaskara. Here, it is important to touch that water and take a sip of that water. That is the way. Sparsha darshan is the thing. You have to touch that deity and that water. Now, where Kamakhya, why it becomes so important in Shakta Tantra is because Kamakhya is known as the Yoni Pitha. Yoni Pitha means basically it is where creation starts in one sense. That is the beauty of this is that any kind of Shakti Upasana of any deity, any form of Shakti, whether it is the highest, the para forms, or whether somebody so inclined to worship yoginis or somebody so inclined to worship the yakshinis or any of the form, any female form of deity can be worshipped in and around the Kamakhya temple. That is why it was so prized even before and even now. The other thing is, as you mentioned, Kamakhya, because it is the Yoni Pitha, the other thing that was noticed is that for a few days in a year, the water that comes out from that cave turns reddish in color. Now, there may be a scientific explanation for this and all that, but the way the tantric perspective of this is that during those 4 days when the water comes out, turns red, it is equivalent to the deity who is having a periods. The temple is closed in that time. There are no fire rituals that can be conducted. In fact, anybody who has who has been able to enter into the mandala of this deity, and it is not that simple minded. It's a belief among the Kalikula tantric upasakas across North India. Those who have any connection to Kamakhya is that the deity tests the sadhak very much. Yes, the deity will put tests on the path, and if you cross those tests, only then you will be able to go higher and higher. And that is also because Kamakhya is basically in one way, if you look at it, there is inside near the Kamakhya main temple, there are all the 10 Mahavidya temples also, and all of them are interconnected. They are all forms of Kamakhya. So Kamakhya is like a physical manifestation of a specific level of tantric diksha that is known as the Purnavishek diksha. So once you have the Purnavishek diksha, you have the authority to worship any Mahavidya, because Kamakhya herself changes herself into any of the Mahavidyas. That is a tremendous capacity. Plus, the process of worship in Kamakhya is entirely tantric. So there is offerings of ritualized alcohol, etc. There are sacrifices. Everything is done as per the tantras. In fact, it was believed there is a story in one of the tantras where Vasishtha actually comes to Kamakhya and he's trying to worship the deity, and he tries for 1000 years and he fails, and he's about to curse the deity then when he hears a divine voice, when he hears the voice of Brahma, his father, because Vasishtha is the mind-born son, and Brahma tells him that you cannot worship this deity in the Vedic way. So he tells him, you go to a place called somewhere perhaps in Tibetan area and all these places. And there you will find a Buddha Rupi Narayan. So this is a Buddha, but not the Gautama Buddha. It is a Buddha of a much earlier era, who is actually Narayan, and he will teach you how to have the, worship this deity. So he goes there, and I think that this event broadly is mentioned in many tantras, not just one. So he goes there and he sees that there is this man, sitting down, and he isn't looking particularly very dressed up in the traditional way. And there is in front of him, there is meat, there is fish, there is alcohol, and there are three beautiful women around him. And he's stunned and he says that, what will this man teach me? He looks like a individual who has fallen from the path. So he gets very angry. That is when there is a dialogue. There's a conversation that happens. And that man turns out to be the Buddha that he had heard about. And he tells him that how the process of Panchamakara is to be used for worship of certain deities, and why this is a faster and a more appropriate method in the Kali Yuga. Specifically says, as Kali Yuga will increase, these are the methods which will work much faster than the traditional methods which will be slow. So after he learns the process of doing the Upasana, and then he goes to not Kamakhya, he goes to Tarapit, which is another temple in Bengal, and he uses those methods to worship the deity, and he attains very fast siddhi. Siddhi here doesn't mean the communion with the deity, sort of. Let's put it that way. So the Upasana of Kamakhya is entirely tantric. Perhaps I don't know if there are too many temples in India where you can say that the system of Upasana is tantric, but Kamakhya is one of them, Tarapit is one of them. So the deity of Kamakhya is like a many-sided mirror. I mean, this is not something which is mentioned in text, but this is perhaps a realization that people can have if you connect with it. So depending on the consciousness of the Upasaka who is trying to approach, she modifies herself and presents herself in that manner. And she can turn into any female form of a deity, any female form. And whether you are worshipping Saraswati, whether you are worshipping Kali, whether you are worshipping Lakshmi, or any of the Mahavidyas, that one deity who is Avyakta, who turns into that and appears to the Upasaka in that form. This is the strangeness and the great power that is Kamakhya.